It is the Rotoballer PGA show for the Vroom Vroom Championship out in Colorado, the BMW Championship for the second leg of the PGA playoffs. We've narrowed the field down from 70 golfers to 50 this week, Spencer. Congratulations on a phenomenal Hideki Matsuyama W last week. I should have been rocking the $100 bill shirt, but I have hardly used it at all this year, so I don't even know where it is. How are you?
I'm doing well. We had this conversation before the tournament last week when it came specifically to Hideki, and we can have conversations about specific players this week where if you look at what Hideki had done at the Olympics specifically, he gained an astronomical amount of strokes. And I kind of made the argument with the flat stick, that is, but I had kind of made the argument that if he had just a neutral putting performance, I think the market would have been a little bit more inclined and bettors would have been a little bit more inclined to jump in on him. Everybody was expecting this negative regression to take place. Hideki had gained in 5 of 7 tournaments with the putter, now make that 6 of 8. You tweeted about it, Byron, like in order to gain 8+ strokes, if Hideki gets that, a lot of times that's going to end up accumulating out to being a victory for him. But the one thing I will say, and for Hideki in this spot, I always run the baseline calculations for short game statistics and try to recalculate out a leaderboard to figure out what a fair performance would be. Hideki was terrible around the green for his own standards there. He was actually the projected winner of that tournament when everything was said and done. It took 8 strokes to get himself across the finish line with the putter, and it took a really clutch finish after almost imploding away the tournament. It was one of those spots, Byron, where I at least had Victor Hovland, and when Hovland had that putt on 18, I was sitting there and I was thinking to myself, well, just let Hovland make the putt. I would rather have Hideki win because of one and done reasons and a little bit of extra exposure on that front that I had for him. But it was fingers crossed that Hovland makes a putt. He doesn't make it, and then they zoom over to Xander, who I have been so bullish on Xander this entire season, and Xander is sitting there. Looks like he's like about to get into a fight or war. Like I don't know if he was a combination of nervous and ready to go, and he's sitting there bobbing like this the entire time. And I'm like, this dude is going to screw me over, and he's going to somehow beat the 2 guys that I have in a playoff if it gets there. But Hideki clutched up at the end. Very thankful to see that. And it's kind of what we always talk about. You don't necessarily need a perfect week to either profit or to get yourself out of jail. And I definitely got myself out of jail with Hideki winning it based off of where some of the matchups landed there. So very fortunate, very happy to see an outright bet come through.
Me too, Spence. When one of us win, all of us win. When one of us shines, all of us shine over here at Rotoballer PGA. So don't forget to use code SUMMER for 30% off. I believe that is still rocking and rolling. If you want to join our Rotoballer squad, you can sign up right there using code SUMMER for 30% off, where it'll get you all the way through the beginning of next year's BMW Championship if it's the same week. We give you 12 full months right over there at Rotoballer. It's a great deal. We are pumping out content through the fall swing. Now, do we want to? Maybe not as much as we would like. I'd rather do some NFL stuff, but that's what you guys are here for. That's what you're going to hit the like button for. You're going to sub to the channel for us, because these are the grinds. Like once all the majors are behind us, once basically the Olympics was done, Spence, it starts getting to a bit of a grind from a content standpoint. We get some new golf courses. We get some really poor fields, all that kind of stuff. So let's enjoy the best 70 golfers on the PGA Tour this week.
You know what's really funny, Byron, when talking about pumping out content and all of that, and we do grind really hard at Rotoballer as a team. I was looking at your Stat Buffet article, and your main picture that got posted, I'll have to tag you in it, was Webb Simpson in it.
Yeah.
That felt very fitting for the Rotoballer brand. For one, Webb to still find his way into a playoff event while not being there, and 2, being able to see him on that picture definitely brought this week a little bit of encouragement at the very beginning.
It has since been changed to Rory McIlroy, where he is in the tournament. So don't fear. That's what happens when you clone posts from the Wyndham Championship, because you didn't want to type out championship again in the headlines and the titles.
My SEO shows the FedEx St. Jude Championship on the bottom, so I forgot to change that. So we had a combination of errors there that we put together.
Joe Nicely, wherever this may find you, we are truly and deeply sorry, but hey, it happens every now and then. So Spence, we're heading to Colorado. We are the 50 best in the field to Castle Pines Golf Club. The last time they were played there, 2006, they'd played there quite routinely for the international. I think that's the name of the tournament. And I went to try and find some old school stats. It was like a Stableford tournament. So you don't even know who the hell was doing what. Green regulations, be damned over there. As long as you just got more pluses or less pluses than everyone else, you are golden. So bit of a weird situation. But what have you, I feel like this week more so than any, we know the whole elevation situation, 10% off, 10% extra, whatever. What else are you looking at for Castle Pines Golf Club?
I feel like as an industry, people have gone in one of two directions with it, to where one, you see 8,130 yards, you think bomb and gouge. Two, you have the answer of the 10% reduction. There's a lot of downhill lies that are going to come into play. You get more of like a 7,200 to 7,400 sort of a tournament. I think the answer probably lands somewhere in the middle of those two answers. It's very important when we build out models with a lack of statistical information that we have on hand, that we don't necessarily build in narratives of our own. Like it's really simple. Like we've talked about this in previous tournaments where there's tons of statistical data that we can pull from, and incorporating that into a model becomes very simplistic. The opposite happens in this example where we have no data to pull from. You talked about the Stableford scoring that's going to come into play if you try to pull it back. And really, the day and age is different of modern golf.
There's like 500 yards difference in the course yardage back then. Anyway.
Yeah, a lot of nuances have been added, a lot of differences in technology. Like all of those things just give you a much different output there. For me, I really tried to look at an outlook to where I took comp venues, and that's not normally something that I would do in these spots, but think like Augusta National, Muirfield Village towards the Jack Nicklaus designs. I also dove into any event that experienced a higher elevation. So I set it for a specific threshold return. If you just want to do it very simplistically from it, that would be Nevada locations like TPC Summerlin, Summit Creek. There are some Hawaii tournaments that land under that same mentality. There are a handful of events that land there. A lot of the West Coast swing tournaments are where you're going to get this higher elevation that comes into play. None of that necessarily delivers an exact scientific answer because of the unknown variables, but I thought for me specifically with the way that I wanted to build this, I didn't necessarily want to say driving distance is what's all important, or I don't think accuracy is what would be all important here. Although I would make an argument that this extra rollout on the elevation could help some of these shorter hitters also. There's a lot of different ways to play it. This is not necessarily this wide open property. There's fast bent grass / POA greens. It's going to be very speedy on the stip meter. You have 10 holes with water. It's a tree line course. There's damage and danger out there that can be found. More so than any of those answers, though, I really wanted to look at that comp narrative of comp courses, strokes gained on Nicklaus designs, how somebody played an elevation. That's pretty much half of my model right there. And then I weighed in a very small amount of a weight of what I think this course will be to kind of get my minor differences. But I think on weeks like this, and for somebody like you and I, Byron, who I do think that on most weeks where we have statistical data, and a lot of it, we try to big brain the situation and we get really funky and in the weeds with the data of how we can traverse it and how we can extrapolate it out. Or in a lot of those cases, we don't even need to extrapolate it out. We have 15 plus years of really good data. I would just be cautious. That would be the advice I would give to everybody, is just be aware and cognizant that there are unknown variables. There's unknown variables of what the winning score is going to be. Let's not build a narrative of this is all distance or all this or all that, because at the end of the day, it might not end up being that.
Which score does it get closer to, Spencer? -20, -15, -10 this week?
I'll say 15. I think it probably lands somewhere in the middle of being really easy and that more difficult, like borderline single digit. I think the par 5 locations are going to be super accessible, and you're going to have to score when you get those opportunities. There's also the ability for players to be slightly more aggressive. There's dog legs that we didn't even talk about, but there's, if you watch even Wyndham Clark, who played it with over on YouTube, like he was very aggressive playing a lot of those holes. And I feel like somebody like him and Rory and these golfers that do have extra distance can take different lines than an Eric Cole is going to be able to take, or a JT Poston. At the end of the day, though, what's funny about that is like my model kind of likes all of those players in different areas, which is why I'm comfortable with the model that I've built. It hasn't necessarily given me a one blueprint strategy of how to find success. It's given me this complete encapsulation of you need to be good throughout your bag. The more areas throughout your bag you can be top notch, the higher end success you can have. And then be creative around these greens, like be able to avoid 3-putt percentage, be able to handle these fast, quick surfaces.
I love it, dude. I've, leaned into the similar kind of things. I think this week in particular, it's really weird because I went and back tested or reverse engineered the proximity buckets that I expected to kind of come through this week. And I've saved that out in my model, which is out there right now on Rotoballer, premium side of things there. And I'll give away the marbles because it's like 78%, I believe, of shots are coming from 175 and out. Now, I even included like an average drive this week, Spencer, was 315, 320 yards for me. Like I made that yardage 20 yards more than a PGA Tour average, potentially 330 at times. And it still left that kind of yardage to be required into the greens. But now that 175 yards minus 10% is 158 yards kind of thing, so like it's not quite a perfect science, but you still have to hit that iron shot the same distance, and the degree of angle that you miss that shot by is still going to be the same in Denver as it is at the coast. Like a 175 yard shot, now you might be using two clubs less, which will make that angle of error a bit smaller because of the additional loft, but your ball will still be traveling 175 yards. Just because you're playing in Denver doesn't mean your iron shots are going to be easier. You're just going to be hitting a shorter iron into the green, right?
There's going to be more calculation, and that's the nuance factor that comes into the course, where I think players and their caddies are going to have to be very in tune. It's not even necessarily know the course. It's understand your clubs and understand the elevation and understand what your club does from a certain distance and where you need to be for it. I will say though, Byron, I think there's going to be an astronomical number of drives that go 400 plus yards. Like that's the one thing that worries me with the proximity buckets in general. And I went in and I tried to get into like the deep dive narrative of where I think the average drive is going to go. I just ran it a little bit simpler than that, where I looked at a lot of the medium range approach shots to about that 200 yard section, like 125 to 200, a little bit of an emphasis there, just because it goes back to the narrative that I talked about previously. There are going to be golfers that are going to play this, in my opinion, much more aggressively than other golfers. And when Rory McIlroy hits a drive 410 yards, it completely changes the expected output.
Exactly. And the thing is, though, Spence, speaking of, there he is. Let me get that out of the way. But I think that's the thing. I think Sweet Spot DFS makes a great point here, saying the straight hitters at altitude like this, their degree of error is still going to be smaller than everyone else. But at the same time, depending where you find yourself, if you've got tons of distance, you'll have a much shorter club in than most guys. I think I did calculate 4 holes that require everyone to pretty much hit to the same area unless you can carry it like 340, 350, which Rory could probably do, in Colorado. We're going to see some guys hit some nukes out there, like you mentioned. So
yeah, I mean, even Wyndham Clark in that video clubbed down in a lot of spots. And I talked about how aggressively I thought he played the course the way that it looked. But I mean, even he was clubbing down. There's just certain holes with the dog legs where you're going to have to lay up to an area.
Exactly. So that's an awesome little break. I feel like we did have to spend a bit more time on the course this week because it's not a usual course. I think we have to make sure that we are finding the right golfers, we're attacking the right statistics when we're building models, when we're kind of isolating specific golfers in that world. So DraftKings has Tommy Fleetwood as the 10th ranked golfer at $9,600. We're going to rock through our top 10 rankings in our models for this week's BMW Championship. Let me get Darbo's comment out of the way so you guys can see what's going on there. Joe Idoni also does a top 10 power rankings that comes out every Sunday night, I believe, or Monday morning, which you can use to read and kind of get a good feel for everything as a nice preview over at Rotoballer. It's a free article. He puts his 10 guys in there, which we will be unfolding for you guys too. If you're wanting to find out exactly why he likes them, he has write-ups for each one as well. He's got Billy Horschel as his 10th ranked guy, which I believe I might or might not be speaking about today. But Spence, you've got Sam Burns in the 10 hole. I'll chat about him at some point potentially. And I'll chat about Tony Finau as my 10th ranked golfer. He is, Spencer, playing some incredible golf right now. He's 7th for safety. I've bet him minus 180 for a top 20. I'm laying some serious juice on like 3 bets this week. And I'm going Tony Finau minus 180, top 20. I think he's just been rattling off top 20 finishes like a beast. He's a phenomenally long golfer. He can hit it a mile if he wants to, and his long irons are sensational. So I like Tony Finau's ability to ball strike this golf course to absolute pieces. I think we're starting to trend in the right direction with some good results from Finau lately. There's a lot to like anything else. I was kind of shocked that Tony Finau wasn't in your top 10, Spence.
Finau was lower than even last week. I had him outside of the top 20, and he's a little bit better than that for me this week. The one thing I will say about Finau, and I guess it goes to 2 areas there. One, I do think he's going to be popular just because of what we've got from him last week. I guess if you look at the actual performance, I mean, there was a certain point of that tournament where he had gotten himself into the top 5, and then it kind of fell apart at the end there. But great par 5 scorer. He has, we'll call it, somewhat local ties. He's Utah, not Colorado, but he's in that region. And when you put yourself into that region, I know a lot of people, I've even seen it on Twitter to where he's going to be comfortable with this style of golf, this style of elevation. I ran things 2 ways from an expected strokes gained perspective. I guess one would be expected strokes gain, and the other one would just be how a player has gained strokes gain when not gearing it towards the course. And I wanted to look at it both ways just because I don't know how this venue is going to play out. Finau was a top 10 expected strokes gain total performer for me when I just ran it for the last 24 rounds. So, I think regardless of where I have him in my model this week, some of the more recent upside totals leave a lot of upside, and there's reasons why I can understand why people like him. Like, I actually have a hot take that we can get into later in the show. I tend to think that there's one player that's going to, I'm not even going to say be like bad chalk. I'm just going to say that he should be double, if not more, the price to win this tournament than what he is. Finau's not that answer. I would say Finau lands somewhere where my model's lower on him. I understand why the public is where they are with him. I'm not going to bet him to win this event, but I'm definitely not as low as I am on this other player that we'll get to later.
Let's get to him because I want to hear who you are fading, my bud. All right, so Tony Finau is the 9th ranked golfer on DK at $9,700. We've got him over there. Sam Burns, which you have 10th, is ranked 9th by Joe Idoni. Then for you, Spence, in the 9 hole is Brian Harman. I don't believe I actually have him inside my top 10, so I'll actually hand him off to you.
I'll say this on the first 2, Byron. Those are not the number 10 and the number 9 for me.
As in, these are your names that are incorrect?
I have Tommy Fleetwood at 10. I have Sung Jae at 9.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pull up your stuff real quick. And then while you're busy speaking about whoever you want, is this guy the right? Do you have Sahith at number 8?
No, I have Sam Burns at number 8.
I'm so confused.
We can work around this though. You might have taken my upside numbers, which is perfectly fine. Like, we can still have the same conversations based off of all this. Let me talk. Well,
I'm just going to clear all your guys and then you can just tell me who they are as we go along.
All right. So in the number 10 spot for me, Tommy Fleetwood, the argument that I would make, and you're going to notice that Rory is not inside of the top 10 when I ran it overall. That's all current form of it. From an upside perspective, he should be a top 6 golfer. He carries that weight for me. This is just from a safety perspective, a golfer that's still going to be expensive. Let's see where the ownership lands. I don't plan on playing Rory this week. It shows within the model, but I have him number 10. Number 9, I have Sung Jae, and to me, Sung Jae is probably going to be one of the best values when we look at leverage that's going to come into play. Like, the top 2 leverage candidates that I have on my board right now in this general section, like if we want to dip it down to, let's just say $8,000 and up, it's Sungjae and Jason Day. Those are the 2 guys that I think the public are going to be much lower on than my model seems to be this week. So I think this is a very nice bounce back and buy low spot for Sungjae. Maybe I end up being wrong on the ownership. I always talk about on Monday that we don't necessarily have numbers that I feel super confident in. But like Sungjae specifically for me right now is 27th in projected ownership. I think there's a lot of upside leverage that can come into play there for a top 10 golfer in my sheet.
I'm with you. I think, he's been quite popular the last little while, Spence, as well. And now he's kind of let people down back-to-back weeks. Do you have any concern about that, or are you kind of excited about people potentially in a 50-man field being bottom half for Sungjae is not the worst ownership ever?
Yeah, it's not that I'm even necessarily like excited about it. It's just I see this situation where it's already being baked in, the bad form, by people not wanting to play him. The price tag remains exactly in the realm of where everybody would consider if the form was fine, but because the form is not fine, you're going to get this outside the top half golfer. And if you look specifically for him on direct comp courses, he was inside the top 10 of my model. If you look at secondary comp courses, which takes a lot more of these like Vegas courses and things of that nature, he jumps to 3rd. And then if you just look at the recent strokes gain total when I didn't weigh it specifically for this course, he was 11th overall. So I thought there were a lot of, top 11, 12 upside totals from him in a lot of those comp course areas, which, I always talk about that course history becomes overweight in people's models, but the actual course specific build of how
Course
somebody
fit
should weigh gets sometimes overlooked. And this is one of those spots where we have no course history, but the actual outlook of just a golfer this week can be looked at. And I think that this is like, there's a lot of quality signs for courses that are similar to this one where he has played well in the past.
Yes. I love it. You got to find ways to get around the building. You got to find ways to get in the building. You got to find ways to get out the building if it's on fire. I have no idea where I was going with that. I did look it up, and I was using St. Jude rankings. So whatever was from FedEx St. Jude was plugged into Spencer's rankings, and this is now a shit show. So let's see what I plugged in, which I do believe is from this week, and I have Colin Morikawa ranked number 9, but I felt like Spencer had him ranked higher at some point, but that was for FedEx St. Jude. So maybe that is not the case, but we'll kind of go along and see what goes on. Ludwig ranked 7th for Joe Idoni, 8th for Idoni for this week's BMW Championship. And then Spencer, who's your 7th ranked guy?
So I have Sam Burns number 8, and there are a lot of golfers in this, mid to lower $9,000 range to like this upper $8,000 section for the most part, where they had very diverse outputs in my model. The safety numbers were a lot better than the upside totals, but the overall ranked viewed them as top 10, 12 sort of golfers. It was kind of one golfer after the next that they fit the criteria for that. Burns has been churning along results. He's inside of the top 7 for me for safety. I couldn't get to him in the outright market. I had when I look at this board, and we can make an argument that the prices are really low in spots, and we can talk about that in a second as we move along with this, but it did feel to me like you have Scotty and Xander that are going to be the cream of the crop here. And then there's like 2 or 3 names that I wanted to figure out to get exposure to one of them. I understand that Burns may not look safe in like the overall respect of what he performs. The safety answer that I'm giving there is the ability for him inside of my model. And this is where he loses the course history answer. But if you look at what he has done specifically over the last, I ran it through 36 rounds. It was a safer return based off of this course than the other golfers would be the best way to describe that answer there.
Yeah. And I think the course fit doesn't seem like it should fit him, Spencer, but he's just playing some really good golf. I see the chat giving us some serious like shade, and you know what? That's fine. You guys you don't play Burns. And when he burns you, and we've played him, and he's not burnt us, because Sam Burns is ranked 5th in mine, 8th in Spencer's. Guys balling out right now. I'm also just giving the chat a hard time. But taking a look at what he's been up to the last little while. 9th at the US Open, that one hurt me a lot because I had a bet with Kenny Kim about that one with Min Woo. Sucked it up at the Travelers, but then we had a 12th and a 5th in the last 2 starts that he's been in. So, like, we're starting to see him come along now. Was the St. Jude a little bit more of a wedge fest, and we'll see this week? Who the heck knows? But I'm starting to kind of imagine that we're going to see some really good performances from Sam. He's starting to trend quite nicely, and I think he can overpower this golf course if his driver doesn't get him in trouble. It can get him in trouble, but when he's driving well, the rest of his game is incredible. So now I don't know what the bent grass is going to do for him, what not, but I'm going to take my gamble on Sam if he's not ultra high owned. Do I feel comfortable betting him in any capacity? Not necessarily, unless it's like an upside bet.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the same area that I landed in with it, that there's no gambling, like betting perspective that I wanted to get exposure to him. I'm not going to play him in matchups. I would agree with you. I would prefer him as like a top 10 sort of a bet, maybe over anything else, but inside of the top 5 for me for expected putting on similar green complexes. So that was a really high weight when I was trying to find golfers that fit the profile for this course that I thought had, the driver has concerns. And if we really want to get technical with it, some of the proximity numbers don't necessarily look great from time to time either. But it kind of goes back to the answer that I was talking about at the very beginning. There are so many unknown variables with this course. Like, I don't want to look at this in the sense of, half the people can look and say, you need to be long off the tee because of the elevation, hit at 400 plus yards. Half the people can look and say, driver's going to get him in problems. There's 10 holes with water. You can't find, you got to be in the short grass. We really don't know what the answer is at the end of the day. So it's kind of like pick your poison of what you think, but also build it from a very, I keep using the word safe, but like a safe perspective. Like, my model is trying to be run in a capacity to where I am looking at comp courses. I am looking at similar builds. I'm looking at golfers, how they perform on very similar setups at the end of the day.
Yes. I think comp courses this week, if you can nail those down perfectly, you're going to be in good shape. For my 8th ranked golfer, I've got Hank Lebioda, as Sia Najad points out here quite nicely. In fact, it's actually Rory McIlroy, who's playing like Hank Lebioda at the moment, but we are neither here nor there. I think, Spence, you said Rory's out of your top 10?
He is. He's inside of the top 6 for me for upside. Yes. Like, if I'm shooting for upside in a bet, I would rather play him than every single name that we're going to talk about for the next couple of slots here. But I worry about his ability to string 4 rounds together. I do love him at these tree line sort of courses where he can use a driver. I'm curious to see where the ownership ends up landing with him. But it would have to be a number and a percentage where I really like. This is almost the answer that we have had many times with Darbo on this show of like, where is leverage not actually leverage if you're taking a bad golfer? So it would have to be a very substantial amount of leverage that my model is yielding. And currently right now, based off of the percentage I have, he's technically a pretty decent leverage. He's one of the, 6 or 7 best leverage plays on the board. And that might be where he becomes enticing based off of that answer, since I still have him as a top 6 sort of an upside talent in this field.
I'm right there with you. He's always Rory. He can win at any given moment, really. Just, I guess the more in shambles his life is, the better he tends to play. So I guess maybe after finishing second to Max Homer last week, maybe that's enough shambles to warrant a solid bounce back again this week. You have who, Spence, in your 7 hole?
I have Hideki Matsuyama.
Okay, I'll chat about Hideki since I have him higher ranked than you this week, which is a great week to have Hideki ranked higher. The week after he wins a tournament, gaining the most strokes he's ever gained in a single week. But we're going to keep on scooting along. Ludwig Oberg, struggling for me a little bit. I don't know, where's he ranked for you, Spence?
I have him 6, so I have him in my next slot.
Okay, well, let's chat about him then, because I think it's an important distinguishing factor here, because he can easily be an awesome pivot, or he can just completely disinterest you from the very get-go. Last week, he's been doing this. The Olympics, first tee shot of the week in the water. First few holes last week, he was out of the tournament sooner than It took me longer to type up his write-up than he was in contention last week. And I've had that happen now a few times, and I'm done with him. I think he's gassed. I think he's having the Tom Kim experience right now where he's had a great year, but it's kind of all falling apart in the meantime. So while I click a few more names here, hit us with your Ludwig Aberg in the 6 hole.
Boom or bust. I mean, really, at the end of the day, I think he's going to carry less ownership than a lot of these names. I know there's a price tag difference, but like him and Rory probably become the discussion point of if you're trying to figure out a way to get different and create leverage. That's probably the decision that needs to be made. I probably lean towards Rory being the one that I trust more between the two, regardless of whatever Rory did last week. I will say this, though, from a pure upside perspective, like I bet Oberg last week, and I always preach on every single show, let's not overreact to a performance or two. I did not think that the Olympic result that he put, I talked about this last week. He was the number one projected scorer for me on that board. He went in the worst direction possible with the short game, and ball struck the hell out of the ball. Then last week, as you talked about, he was out of the tournament 4 holes into it. I checked the scores early in the morning, and I also had the outright on him, and it was the unfortunate thing that I also spent more time writing about him than he was actually in contention in the tournament. It's just, to me, with these spots, and it's like the only thing that I'll throw out there, and I'm not saying it's even right or wrong, when you start getting narratives that are coming in over and over again where Oberg's gassed, or this player has bad course management, or that player is in the most pristine form, it's usually where you can find some differences if you're willing to take a gamble. I'm not saying that Oberg is necessarily that choice that you should be making it with. I'm also not saying, though, that you can't consider him. Like, there's real upside to be found from him that if you think he's gassed, don't play him. But realize at the end of the day, a lot of the ball striking returns are still going to give you a top 5 output. And, you know, if you look at the betting price in the market, I couldn't get there for him to win just with the way I built my card. I didn't think it was the worst outright number in the world either. But we're once again talking about high upside markets. The floor here is another disastrous performance.
Yeah, it could very much be. And I am worried about the elevation between hole to hole and his knee, because he does have, I believe, a torn meniscus in his knee, which he's been playing on. And, you know, maybe early on when it's torn, he can get over that and kind of deal with it. But maybe some bad habits are creeping into his game to kind of, you know, compensate for that. And him and Spieth need to just get fixed and go from there, because it's not looking good. But
that would be more of my concern, is the injury thing that we never got handled with it.
Walking over these hills, all of that stuff, it's not looking good, Spence. I'm concerned for him. But we got James in the chat here lolling at Aberg and Clark. I will loll at Aberg with you, James, but you leave Spence's boy alone when it comes to Wyndham Clark, okay? I've been betting him every time he doesn't win, and this week it's going to be different. Wyndham Clark is starting to find himself a path to victory. He's starting to find some repeated consistency. The putter is starting to light up. The game is trending in the right direction. He just doesn't know how to start a golf tournament. If this PGA Tour was the opposite of LIV and was only the last 3 rounds of a tournament, Wyndham Clark is like top 3 every time he's teed it up the last few times, because he's just been balling out after a poor start in round 1, and he just can't seem to get it figured out. But at this price, we're going to it. So we'll see what he can do. It's probably the lowest I've bet him, Spencer, but it's also a 50-man field. So it's a bit of like we've come to know Clark in the 60s and the 80s at times. And now I think, he's 35 or something like that. So I don't know. Where do you have Wyndham Clark in your rankings?
Okay, you ready for the hot take that can't do anything but burn me at the end of the day here with what I'm about to say? I think Wyndham Clark is... It doesn't mean that he's not going to play well, and it doesn't mean that he doesn't come in second place. I think there are some areas of his game that obviously make sense, and I'll talk about those in a second. I think Wyndham should be closer to that 60 or 70 to 1 price. I thought he was one of the most mispriced options on the board. I bet him at the Olympics. I bet him at the St. Jude. I like the way that he fit those courses. My biggest concern with Wyndham here remains the approach play. Now, if he can hit the ball 400 plus yards, if I was his coach here and I was like, Wyndham, and I know he's played the course a million times, and that narrative of him being the hometown boy at this course has built in a lot of ways for the way that people are going to play him. He's going to be extremely, extremely popular. All the reasons that Darbo just said in the chat there, like it's home field advantage, just a golfer trending in the right direction. If I was his coach, I would say be as aggressive as you can be out here, use driver whenever you can, and try to get into your short iron proximity range, and then use the putter to an advantage. If you can be extremely aggressive, make some putts, and get into a shorter distance, that's how he's going to win. And maybe that's the route that he takes where he does end up getting himself towards the top of the board. I just worry that the actual comp course outlooks, like outside of the elevation answer and outside of this being a course that actually he knows, a lot of the comp course answers of how I ran it were very disastrous in my model. Like outside of the top 40 in a 50-man field in multiple areas. I haven't liked him on Nicholas courses. I haven't liked him on a lot of similar comp courses. My model didn't like him when you got these like specific green complexes in the specific fairways. I think he's going to be very popular. I'm not saying he's necessarily going to come in 40th place at the end of the day here, but I think the ceiling here is much broader, or like the ceiling versus floor combination is a lot wider than people are going to anticipate for the spot, just because the Olympics, he turned it on after the first round. Last week, he turned it on and really worked himself up the leaderboard. Everybody's going to want to play him this week. I would just say, as somebody who finds myself on Wyndham Clark more than most people, I would say pump the brakes and just know what you're signing up for with him. My bet is going to be that he does not win this golf tournament, though. So if we're talking specifically like players who are going to win, I don't think Wyndham is going to be one of the names that wins this, unfortunately, I guess. Byron.
That's totally fair, Spence. We're trust me, I'm married. You're allowed to criticize me on national television. You know, we're okay. What I do want to say, though, yeah, go ahead.
No, you can go first. I was just going to touch on what Darbo talked about, because it's a case by case study with it, and it's been, you know, if you look at Xander at Torrey Pines, he was disastrous at that tournament so many years in a row, and then he finally figured it out. You never know how somebody's going to react. Like Jason Day has said that he doesn't play Muirfield, and like, even though it's like it's in his backyard, but he's been disastrous there. Like, just because a course is nearby you proximity wise doesn't mean you necessarily play it well.
Facts. And that was a small inkling, Spence. I've got him ranked freaking 6th in my model. You know, I'm betting him to win, and I have each ways on him for a top 5. I bet him for a top 5 last week. He finished 7th. You know, like, it is what it is. I think I will definitely be leaving him alone in DFS if that's the case. You know, like, I've found my exposure now. It doesn't matter how many people have bet him outright, that it's me and us versus the books. You know, DFS is a different beast. I know we do have DFS pricing up top here and all that jazz, but when there's severe ownership on a very volatile golfer, things can happen. You know, like, I am fully aware of that, and it's okay. So
I think
let him do his thing.
I think he's a better bet for the reasons, even though, like, I've talked about all the reasons why I'm not betting him.
Yeah.
He's at least a better bet because you can at least deal with what you perceive to be a value versus 20% plus owned at a price tag that 3 weeks ago had him at like the lower $7,000 range, and he was the biggest. I did an Action Network show, and I didn't even give the pick. My co-host Roberto gave the pick, and he gave Wyndham Clark top 5 at the Olympics. And after day one, Wyndham was like in last place or near last place. I have never seen so many people write on a post nailing Roberto's pick for him to come top 5. And, you know, Roberto gave the answer on the show of high upside, low floor, know what you're signing up for. I think it's a lot of similar sentiments here. I just don't know if the upside is necessarily as high because of the proximity play, in my opinion.
You know, I think, yeah, I guess we've given you guys the good and the bad and everything in between for old Wyndham this week. Let's dive into someone that's kind of might be doing the opposite, where we're really starting to find some trends in the right direction for Victor at 10-4 as the 5th ranked option. Joe Idoni has Victor as his 5th ranked guy. Spence, who's your 5-hole?
I have, let me reorder this because I've gotten off it. I don't even want to talk about my 5th player. Okay. This is you can put Eric Cole in there. I don't know how Eric Cole continues to find his way to work. I bet him at 125-1. You want to talk about somebody whose driver is going to probably kill them in this tournament? It will be Eric Cole. But For me, this is going to be a situation where I think he's going to be extremely popular for DFS after the recent form. I have players that I can pivot to. This is almost your Wyndham Clark answer at just a much lower scale, where I bet him for an upside market. I'm fine betting him as a top 10, and I probably am not going to have a great deal of exposure to him elsewhere just because I think he's going to be extremely popular.
Cool. I love it. Grab the books by the nuts and let the DFS worlds do their thing with Eric Cole. Whether or not he drives you nuts or not remains to be seen. Colin Morikawa is Joe Idoni's 4th-ranked option, and Hideki Matsuyama is DraftKings' 4th-ranked option at $10,500. Spencer, once again, I'm asking you, my hands in my lap, who's your 4th-ranked golfer?
I have Patrick Cantlay 4th. He does have negative trajectory for upside, which, I mean, I guess we've seen this season where he's not actually getting himself across the finish line, but really good course fit for him. You know, a lot of people that just look at the BMW Championship narrative, you're going to see that he's won multiple times. Not the same course. Realize that as you're building a model here. But I thought there was a lot to like about him. I couldn't get to him in the outright market necessarily, but I have no issues with him with his profile.
Yeah. If he lands up being a situation where he's unowned and just we've ranked him inside our top 4, and he's the 8th-ranked price out there, there's value to be had there, especially if he's low-owned. Who the heck knows what this guy gets up to? Isn't also one of his best surfaces bend putting surfaces, Spence?
I have him in my model. Let me look. Yeah, I mean, he grades well from a comp course perspective there. He's the number 1 in total strokes gained on secondary comp courses. That's going to take his dominance that he's had at a venue like TPC Summerlin when he's played it and venues like that. But I think he's an overall pretty safe commodity on the board. Now, I tend to think, Byron, that he's going to be popular. Maybe I'm wrong on that one. We will see where he ends up landing. But I think enough people and enough of this narrative has come out in this space where, you know, all the comp courses that everybody keeps giving over and over again, and, you know, throw Muirfield into that range also. It's like the Cantlay wheelhouse over and over again of all the places he pops. But I will say, when Cantlay pops in certain tournaments, he does year after year. He's almost the new school version of what Webb used to do.
Ooh, yes. Yes. Spencer, have you found a new Webb? A Cantlay Webb?
I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you this with Patrick Cantlay, if you want to put like a direct correlation between those two, look in the last, not specifically this season, but look at the last like 3 years of my most bet golfers. It's Cantlay and Xander. I bet Cantlay at 25 to 35 to 1 for what must have been 2+ years in a row. And I've never really reaped any of the benefits from it. I just consistently watch him underperform when I take him.
Yeah. The last time I bet him, Spence, was last year at the St. Jude, and we know how that all unfolded for him in a wet, splashy grave. All good in the hood. Hideki Matsuyama just absolutely ball striking the crap out of it. Every time he's finished inside the top 5 in the last year, it's been 3 times. He's either won a tournament or won a medal. Outside of that, it's not been any top 5s. He's got no other top 5s that have not claimed him any hardware. The guy is a hardware hunter. Does a top 5 get him hardware this week? Means he'd win again, back to back. We haven't really seen too many people go St. Jude, BMW. I guess we've seen a few Wyndham St. Judes, but I don't know, Spence. I think he's going to be popular again. Does he gain putting again? There's a lot of agains and gains and gains to deal with this week for Hideki. Give me your take.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know how popular he's going to be just because of the price tag. Like, we finally have gotten this boost in price for him. I would say he's a negative value for me based off of the price. Very slight. I mean, I think he probably should be in the mid to high 9,000s. I don't have a massive take one way or another, though. I think he's a legitimate top 7 player in this tournament.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know where the heck his caddy and coach are, which can he continue this a second week in a row without Shota on his bag? Does the swing fall apart without a coach there? I don't know what his routines are. I'd imagine it takes longer than a week to just get your visas and stuff I mean, I should know this, but it does take, I know this stuff. It takes forever, unless you get preferential treatment.
I don't know if this is correct. I saw it zoom by on my Twitter earlier today. I don't know if you saw this. Apparently, Hideki, before round 4, after he had gained like 8 strokes putting, was asking Brad Faxon for putting tips before the round. So he was still searching for stuff with the putter, if that report is accurate there. I mean, Faxon is a good player to ask for putting. So, like, that's, if he wants to ask for that, that doesn't necessarily mean he's searching, I guess, at the end of the day. But it is interesting to be asking questions while your coach is not there. And I don't know if he felt like something was off or what that was. I don't want to read too much into it, but it's at least noteworthy to me.
I don't know when it was, Spence, but I know what happened is Hideki found out that Faxon said he's likely going to underread this putt because most professionals have been overreading it or whatever. And Hideki saw the clip and was like, said to his team, go find me this man. I need to know what he saw that we never saw. And I want to know how he found that out. You know, maybe it was just seeing that putt over and over, or Faxon had a way to read it that Hideki wanted to find out, I think.
I retract my statement then if that's what it was based off of that. That's just somebody who's like
trying to
Yeah. That's somebody who's probably very confident in his stroke and thinks he's going to make putts and was like, I just misread it. So yeah. I will retract my statement then based off of that.
Yeah. I don't know when it was, but I know that was, part of the situation there. So Joe Idoni in the 3-hole has Rory McIlroy paired up with DraftKings in the 3rd spot there at $10,800. I'm trying to make black that is not there for you, Spence, in the 3 spot. Who's in the 3-hole for you?
So this was who I bet in the outright market. This is where I went. I took Colin Morikawa. He's 17-1 at Circa. He's between 14 and 16-1 at most other locations. It's been this back and forth conversation that I feel like we've been having, and that I've even specifically been having, when you look at Schauffele and Morikawa, where the market has too heavily shifted both of these players in directions. And many of those early season returns probably put us in the spot where Schauffele was the better potential option. The one that I look at most frequently when I have this discussion is look at the US Open. He entered the US Open at, I want to say 12, 13, 14-1 is what he got down to. Like, he's a lower total in a 156-man field with all the live players in a better tournament than the price that we're getting on him here. And the argument that I made at the US Open was Xander is a better golfer, which I still stand by being the sentiment there. But you had this spot where Xander was 14, 15-1 and Colin was 14, 15-1. And I thought there was too big of this drift that has happened in the market because of Morikawa's short game. Now, all of a sudden, we've gotten this reverse outcome that's come into place where Xander's essentially the new Scotty Scheffler on these boards every single week. And Scotty is some hybrid version of like Tiger, not in his prime, and somebody else where like he's always going to be in this 3-4-1 range. And I, as much as I love Xander, and we'll talk about all the reasons why I love Xander in a second, and he's going to be very popular this week, when I'm looking for value on the board, there were 3 players that were inside of the top 10 in every single category that I ran. It's going to be the top 3 names in my list. Colin Morikawa is going to be the one that grades the lowest of the 3 of them, but it's the answer I had about Rahm at the Olympics. He was the closest one to Xander and Scotty for me. Last week it was Oberg. That was technically an incorrect take, although I will say you land on Hideki, a little bit can be forgiven there, that you at least end up with the right name there. And I would say Colin is the closest one to those 2 this week. So it's a different DFS discussion to be had because the price tags will indicate that. But when there's drift in the market, 16, 17-1, I'm going to bet on Morikawa, where I would not be shocked, Byron, after the industry as a whole just peppering him over and over and over again, talking about the short game, the short game, the short game. He all of a sudden loses nearly 5 strokes ball striking and everybody's jumped off of him. I think it's too reactionary as an industry. And while there's a chance Colin could do it again and go in the wrong direction, I'm always going to run longer term data. So he was inside of the top 4 of every single category that I ran. Like, that's, my model's not a model that loves Colin Morikawa. Most times I'm trying to fade him. I faded him last week. He was one of the worst values I had in the $10,000 and up section for pure upside. I think it's a different outlook for him this week.
Yeah. It's interesting, Spence, because I can see where you're coming from there. Some negatives on him. I guess this is where I'm out. It's the long iron play. If I'm expecting tons and tons of long iron play, that's definitely his weakest area of his approach metrics. It has been coming together a bit better since reuniting with his coach, but it's still not his ultimate strong suit. And then Colin Morikawa's odds the last little while, just in 2024, if you've been betting him every time he's played, you have to hit 2 wins on him to make your money back. He is now officially one of the few guys that's in the 100 plus, debt for me, which I've been using to track guys there. And I also said, if I ever bet Colin Morikawa outright, I've been kidnapped and it's a distress signal. So,
I mean, and I think that part of it's very fair. And the long iron proximity is probably where I ran it from inside of 200 yards more than you did. Yeah. And it also goes back to the point on Morikawa of him being bad value. Morikawa, most of these weeks, is like legitimately the worst value that I have on the board because of like those US Open examples where it's, I like the golfer, but I hate the price. He's a golfer that should be 22-1 in that tournament, and he's 14-1. And you have enough of those 14-1 overcorrections in the market, and he's a fan favorite. People like to bet him, and he's been on a lot of cards this year. He's probably made, I think, 2 outright cards of mine. Maybe, I mean, that's like probably a career leading number. I usually bet him 0 times in an entire year, but I think it's like where I agree with you, Byron. As a value, it's almost always been wrong. I would say specifically here with that 16-17, it's the most right it's been, but I gave that same answer about Oberg and look what happened there. So value doesn't always mean that the outcome works the way that you want.
No, you're trying to just micromanage, micromine value every week, and just ultimately at the end of multi-years, you've profited. That's the goal of betting. You're not going to try and just win one specific week every single time, although that's what we try to do by finding value on a long-term basis. So Joe Idoni, DraftKings, myself, all have Xander Schauffele in the 2 spot. Spence, is he your 2 guy, or is Scotty lacking behind Xander this week?
So there have been 3 occasions, maybe 4 occasions this year where Xander has graded above Scotty in my model. He graded above him at the PGA Championship. He graded above him at the US Open. He graded above him at the Open Championship. So he won 2 of those tournaments. And then there's a 4th one recently. I can't recall which tournament it was where he was above Scotty. So technically, even at the US Open, he did beat Scotty in the tournament. So I feel like my model has had a pretty good track record in these spots of when Xander is above Scotty, it has been correct in most of these occurrences. I have Scotty number 2 this week. There are some, I don't want to call it negative marks for Scotty for me. I will say though, like some of the recent strokes gain numbers are not as crisp as they have been earlier in the season. I still think he is a bona fide top 5 candidate every single time he tees it up. He is the safest golfer from a week in, week out perspective. He is putting the pieces together over and over again. My concern in my model that pushed me in the wrong direction, and it's very slightly when we have to make decisions here, it just comes down to the putter and some of these secondary comp courses of how I ran it. And as a third mark, we have seen Scotty, he is very particular and exact with his game. Scotty can hit a 200-yard shot exactly 200 yards and tell you it's going 200 yards. I don't know if the elevation shift changes that for him to where more comes into play and it kind of gets him out of that grind mode that he's in. I think he's safe. I would rather play Xander as like the reduction in price. But the unfortunate answer to that, Byron, is I think that the market for the first time, maybe in a while, might actually agree with that sentiment. I would not be shocked if Xander wasn't the most popular player on the board.
I wouldn't be shocked either. He's $1,200 cheaper than Scotty this week when it comes to DFS. He's a significantly better long iron player than Scotty. And let me just retract that. He's a better long iron. He's not significant. Anybody that's a significantly better iron player than Scotty Scheffler is not from this world. I will say that his long iron numbers are better than Scotty Scheffler's, although Scotty's are pretty darn solid as well. It's just, man, Spence, Scotty is just inside the top 5 non-stop, dude. It's automatic almost at this point, like a 70% clip I've got rated for him at this moment. So it's going to be crazy to see there. But Xander at this price tag, I would say, is the value at a golf course like this.
I think where Darbo's correct and now where the discussion ends up changing with it, if we want to start talking about leverage potential. And I kind of tend to agree that Xander is going to be astronomically owned. And this narrative of elevation, this narrative of his putting, he's 50th out of 50 players in my model on expected putting on comp courses. Like, I think enough of that push is going to happen in the space where he's going to go under the radar for himself. I mean, if he's sub 20%, like I like being contrarian, like, and I like these spots. Like, I don't know how you don't play Scotty if he's the safest golfer in the world. He's 18 to 20% owned, and you're getting this reduction in ownership off of like I don't know if Morikawa will be popular, but like the Morikawas, the Xanders, all those names. Like I said, there's 3 golfers that separated themselves in my model, and it's a very minimal distance between the 3, depending on exactly how I ran it. From an overall sense, it's a big 2 and a third in Morikawa. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see where that Scheffler ownership lands, because this might be one of those positions where people overthink this a little bit.
Yeah. And Darbo's making some really good points over here, saying that with 7 10K options this week, Spencer, there's 10 7K options this week, and there's 7 10K options. So it's going to be difficult to rotate in players. You can't play all 7 of those. Literally cannot, even if there wasn't salary, because you only got 6 spots. So it's like, where do we go? And I think just let that ownership horse take you to the water, like just go and drink what it's drinking and find your guys that you like. And if one of them becomes less popular than the rest, then there we have it. You've got a way to kind of get heavy on the field and double your ownership and exposure to that golfer there. So
let me ask you this question really fast before we move out of that $10,000 section, now that we're on the topic. And look, we don't have ownership in front of us. This is not me asking you a question to where we will pull this clip when it ends up being wrong, or if it ends up being wrong for either one of us. But let's just say, based off of early ownership projections here, what would be the name or 2 that you are going to be lower on than consensus in that $10,000 range, which, as you said, we can't play all of those 7 names. So if you had to remove one of them, which one are you removing?
I'm taking Colin out and Ludwig. I'll give you 2. I'll take both of them out of there. For me, I think they're going to be, well, one is not playing well. The other might still be quite popular, but I have no idea which way this is going to go, Spence. There's so many guys up top here that people could click. I think it's going to be flat. I don't know how much difference we're going to see in ownership. Maybe Ludwig is the one guy and some Rory where we don't see a lot. If Colin's the same as everyone else, I'm out on him. I just don't see his upside showing up again this week at this golf course.
I'm probably gonna give the answer, and this is the one like of a name that can come back and bite me. I think he's a better upside target, but it's a lot of the similar answers that I talked about with Wyndham Clark. These are 2 golfers, Clark, and the name is going to be Victor Hovland here, that I have been backing so much more frequently, and I finally got the return I was waiting for on each one of them last week. But now all of a sudden, after one good tournament, I think Hovland's going to be extremely popular. I love his upside profile for this tournament. If we want to just, I know he's not in the top 10 and there's some of those safety numbers. If we want to just talk about upside here, he's inside the top 5 of my model. He's the name where if somebody comes out and wins this event that I'm not going to probably play, it'll be Victor Hovland. It's just, I think he's going to be way too popular for my liking. And I would rather play Colin Morikawa, who maybe I end up being wrong on this answer. I think Morikawa is going to be the pivot away from Hovland after one good performance from one and one bad performance from the other.
That's fascinating to think about, Spence, because for Victor to be as, disinteresting as all get up until he shows up and has one good week, do we see a PGA Championship type situation where he honey-dicked all of us at that one and finished nicely? But I do like Valhalla as a comp course for this kind of a venue, a long golf course, but still very scoreable, I would imagine, if you keep your ball in play, which Victor Hovland is incredibly. He leads this field in strokes gained off the tee, which I'm, grading quite highly this week. And I will even go as far to say, although he's not inside the top 10 of my model, he's not even inside the top 20 because of how bad he's been playing this year. I bet him at what was he, 25 this morning or 20? And I just think it's just making too much sense. I know he can win golf tournaments. He likes to get hot during this time of the year. I think that there's some Olympia fields, some Valhalla comps to this kind of venue, especially with the rough. Victor's incredible out of the rough. And if he can just keep this momentum going, we're in good shape. Again, this is a bet. It's not a DFS take. If he's a popular play, I'm out. We'll find our way around that quite easily.
I think that's a fair breakdown to that.
Perfect. Cool beans. Let's get into some other guys that we want to chat about lower than the $10,000 range that the majority of our guys are in. I think we pretty much spoke about everyone except for Tommy Fleetwood, Spencer. We can get into a few other guys as we go along. Any takes on Tommy Fleetwood having his worst putting performance in my database since 2017 last week?
I think Fleetwood's very playable for DFS. 10th in my model. Technically, as of this exact second, positive value for leverage. Fair price tag at 9,000. That's exactly where my model thought he should have been. I don't have an issue with him one way or the other.
Yeah, I think, my model's not the biggest fan of him either. He's 21st and 27th, kind of in that Victor Hovland mold, but it's mainly got to be doing with just what Tommy's been up to, man. It's been a struggle for him to kind of get the ball in the hole lately. The results have been very mediocre for the most part outside of the third at the Olympics, or the second, sorry, at the Olympics. It really hasn't shown us much more than a top 10 there for some time. So his upside takes a big ding there because of that, but his safety kind of holds true. Billy Horschel, Spence, $9,300. What are we thinking? I've bet Billy Horschel as well, I think at 40-1 this week. If Billy, you just mentioned Murfield Village as a little bit of a comp, keep the ball in play, make your birdies when you need to. He's trending quite nicely. He's playing some really solid golf, outside of being the cheerleader for Rye at the Wyndham. Last week, he played quite nicely again. What did he have last week as a finish? I think it was a really solid option as well.
10th. I think he birdied the final hole to get himself inside the top 10 there.
So there we go. His last 3 starts have been 2nd, 7th, and 10th. So maybe we're going the wrong direction. Maybe we going the right direction with Billy Horschel. But I just feel like from a form perspective, at 40-1, you're getting a guy with 3 consecutive top 10s entering the week in a 50-man field. A 40-1 number. What would you equate that to in a, I guess, 70-man and then a full field, Spence? Does the 70-man really make that much of a difference? Does it become 50?
No, I mean, if from an actual hold percentage in my model, based off the last 2 weeks, if you look at the prices that you're getting this week versus what you got last week, it is the exact disparity difference that we had there. And, it's a player by player answer of where the value ends up going on the boards and what the actual win equity becomes for each one of those players. But I think specifically for Horschel inside of my build, the long-term data has massive concerns for him. This is one of those spots where I kind of like him. When Horschel gets hot, he gets scorching hot. We've seen him do this during the FedEx Cup before, where he catches fire and he ends up running through all these events and, getting himself to where he needs to be in these positions. So this is an informed golfer. I think that he is very, very expensive for DFS. I am curious to see where the ownership goes based off of that answer, but good safety ratings in my model. Like all the safety numbers are trending positively for him.
Cool. Any other guys you want to mention in the 9s before we kind of get out? I know we never mentioned too much about Russell Henley at all. You don't have to mention anyone if you don't want. We can chat about guys in the 8s.
Not really. I like Henley. I think Burns and Henley are 2 players that are positive values for me. That's kind of the discussion that I was having, to where I would say each one of those specifically in a comparison against Wyndham Clark, I would rather have each one of those 2 names. I think it's going to be a substantially less ownership percentage. Yeah. So, and that's the thing here. And I just want to preface that, before I go on and I say every single guy is unplayable. It's a 50-man field. There's massive ownership percentages that are drifting out into certain players that have been the most boom or bust commodities of the entire year, where, as I talked about with Wyndham, I'm not even exaggerating. A week ago, nobody wanted to really play him. There was pushback when I recommended him as a triple-digit number at 100-1 to win that tournament. And it's not this Wyndham Clark game again. And it's there's just we can't go from being there to now all of a sudden now everybody wants to play him because of this hometown, home course bomber sort of a narrative. I agree with what you said, and we don't need to go back across the same points again to where there are different markets where he makes sense. But for DFS, I might end up being wrong. He might come in third place. I don't think he's going to win the tournament, but even if he wins the tournament, like I'm just not going to be there at the ownership percentage that we see. I'd rather make him beat me.
Cool. So options in the eights then, Spence. Where are we pivoting to? I think, are people going to get off of Corey Connors and Siwoo Kim are the only two guys to have made the top 50 and the BMW Championship without a top 5 in the last year. So congrats to those two on being superiorly average in 2024.
I don't really have interest in either one of them. Like Connors is a fade for me this week.
Justin Thomas, Seth Aguiar, Aaron Rye.
So as far as value goes in my model, the best value would be Jason Day, but Thagala, Rye, and Day are the three names that were the most enticing for me in my build. And I mean, this is regression, as like this is what you tell people when you have friends where they move on past the loved one and you're like, please do not answer the call. Do not go back. You don't need to go down this path. I have now said more bad words about Wyndham Clark, who's been my boy for the last year. And now we're having conversations about how great Jason Day is again. Jason Day, the really interesting thing about him is I faded him last week. I actually took Justin Thomas against him in a matchup and I lost. And Day, for the first 2 rounds, and then we saw him in the 3rd round make a push and then go backwards on the final day. But Day was one of the biggest underachievers throughout that entire tournament that I had in my model. I know the ball striking regressed for him on Sunday, but it was 3 really superb ball striking days for him. And that's not normally the answers that I expect from Day when you get some of these proximity tests where I'm looking from specific ranges. So I don't know if people are going to go back to Day, and I didn't really go to him last week to begin with, but it's the situation with Day, in my opinion, to where like if he closes the tournament where he had moved himself up to into the top 10, I think he's a much more popular option that people are considering because he regresses back and falls outside the top 20. It's just this number on the board of a 22nd place finish. And you don't really realize that there was real upside that he was presenting where he was lacking in a lot of the areas where you wouldn't normally expect him to lack from. So I like Day. And then, I mean, I think you and I might be joining you on this one of just Sahith Theegala every single week for upside, and I never seem to get him right. But my model likes him again this week for upside. So, I mean, take that with a grain of salt because outside of the Fortinet, where that one I got very correct, I've been pretty much wrong on him in a lot of these other spots.
He's not a model guy. The way he plays golf, it's hard to model Sahith Theegala.
Let me. So, what do you think he ranks in my model for upside?
12th.
8th.
Yeah. And safety like 23rd or something.
Safety is 24th. It gets negative there.
It's weird. He's just so volatile. It doesn't make any sense. Yet he finishes inside the top 20 in like 50% of his starts. I don't understand how it happens. He just gets it. He's like a Mediterranean Houdini. It's fun to watch him play golf. I'm not on him this week. I typically am. That'll be scary if he does find himself into contention. Anyone in the 8s outside of, I got some Adam Scott love, Spencer, 10th in my model. Adam Scott's, when I use the strokes gain total to calculate my stuff, I use a median. I don't use the average. So I don't want the guys like, if you're going to have a bad round, cool. I don't want that to reflect in my handicapping of you because if you're going to play badly, you're going to play badly. I want your middlemost round. Adam Scott's middlemost round in 2024 has been top 9. He's 9th in the field in strokes gained there for me. So he's been doing some wonderful things off the tee in particular. I mean, he's 11th in this field. It's been very, very nice to see. The short game also really tidy. I mean, he's 8th ranked short game specialist in this field, if you combine putting and around the green play. So he's doing a lot of interesting things. The form has been a little wishy-washy. We had a top, 10 at the Open. It was nice to see that. At the Scottish, he finished 2nd and then kind of fallen off the map with an 18th at the St. Jude. So it is what it is, but I will be playing some Adam Scott at $8,300. I'm a fan. I think he's moving in the right direction again. We'll see what he can do. Any
I,
parting words for any $8,000 golfers as we get out of here?
I mean, shocker. I'm wearing a UNLV shirt right now, but shocker that I would like Adam Scott. No, I think what you said makes sense, and my model liked him. He was another name in that $8,000 range that was technically a value for me.
Beautiful. I love it. I think he's a sneaky player. And I don't know how popular he's going to be amongst Aaron Rai, Akshay Bhatia, Sahith, Shane Lowry, Bearsy. Like he's just going to blend into the mix with his khaki outfits, and I think he's going to just be totally fine. I mean, Colorado seems like a perfect spot for Adam Scott to hang around there. So in the 7, Spence, got some Davis Thompson, got some Robert McIntyre, got some Keegan Bradley at the bottom there, and then we got Ed asking what we think of Pendrith. So let's address our chat right away, and let's speak about Taylor Pendrith at $7,300.
I think he's going to be so popular.
Yeah. I have him 28th and 20th for safety and upside. He's the 32nd DFS ranked option. Like it makes a lot of sense. Maybe you want to bet him high upside finish, like a top 10 or something, and leave him alone in DFS at $7,300, or make him your one guy that you hammer, in this bottom range. But even then, Spence, I mean, the consistency from him has been so, like he really hasn't given us a phenomenal finish yet outside of the 3M. But what would you do? You'd likely pivot off of him to someone else then in this range.
I mean, I wouldn't personally play him. Like I would rather play, like, if this is a wild statement that I'm about to give right now, because I'm not necessarily going to play this golfer either, but like I would rather play Robert McIntyre if you want to play a popular name that's going to be in this section than Pendrith. I think Harman has some playability. If we look at distance here being the ultimate answer, Harman's not going to grade well, but with a model like mine that didn't look at like that, he's a fringe top 26 sort of play, which, I mean, we're splitting hairs of what's actually value when we get down into this section. Like there's very few that are massive values for me compared to the other names. Like I guess the 2 best values I had would be Fitzpatrick at 7,800, who the recent form with him up until last week had kind of been disastrous. Even an 18th isn't exactly what you're looking for from him. And then I ran this and I tweeted this out. I ran every single player, and there were 9 of them, I believe, that graded inside of the top 28 of every single category that I ran this week. There was one name lower than $8,000 that fit into that section. There are some lack of upside marks that are going to fit the profile from him. I mean, there's a lot of like 25th, 26th, 27th, 25th. If we cut this down to like top 23, he would be out. But I kind of like Denny McCarthy.
It was a very weird name to see on your tweet, Spence, because
that's another
the
player
form has been very poor. Like recently, it has not been good from Denny. But when it comes to maybe a good course fit, it's if he can get it together with the short game and bring forth that approach play that he showed us last week, maybe that's something exciting to kind of look at. But what was going to be the first thing that popped out of that for him, if that makes any sense there?
So the best category for him in my model was weighted strokes gained total, which took my example of a build for what I anticipated this course being. So that's me kind of trying to deep dive into what I believe this venue is. If you look at any of the more recent stuff, he does slip to 25th, but like I said, still fits into that area. And then the weighted scrambling, I kind of talked about the ability to be creative in some of these situations and to be able to get up and down and to have a putter that I trust on these greens. I thought this was a golfer that, I mean, even if we look at the last 2 tournaments that he's played, where you had a really cold run there of missed cut at the Genesis Scottish Open and the Open, those are not 2 tournaments. I mean, those are like overseas events where things can just go wrong for anybody. All of a sudden you put him back in the States, 33rd at the Wyndham. Okay result. He actually played well outside of the putter. He had the reverse Denny McCarthy sort of a week where he gained in every single area, loses 1.7 with the putter. And then you put him at the FedEx St. Jude last weekend. He loses 2.5 off the tee. He goes nuclear with the flat stick, which is more of what we expect from him. Gains around the green, gains a little bit with the approach. I think the approach play is interesting though. Like if we look at the last 5 tracked events, he's gained 4 of his last 5 tournaments. And that's Before that, he had lost 6 consecutive times and
Yeah.
10 of 11 before that. So some of the more recent form with him with the iron play does look a little bit more enticing than you would normally get. Going to be the same answer, though, that we've talked about with like the Eric Coles of the world, where there are real downsides to the driving.
Yes. And you know what, Spencer, when you got this good of a short game specialist at a venue we don't really necessarily know how it's going to play, if you got something that's different to what the prevailing narrative is for what's needed this week, I'll take a gamble on you at $7,400. I mean, he's not going to be 15% owned, I doubt, like especially after his form entering the week. So another guy who I will take a gamble on to a small degree is Benny On. He's been one of my favorite guys, but he's starting to kind of lose it a little bit. Maybe, we're getting to the point in the season, Spencer, where guys have run out of steam. You can kind of see the guys that have kind of lost their vigor. He's one of them, but potentially an option if he's low owned again. As we get out of the sevens, I'm going to make you choose a very difficult choice here.
Okay.
Taylor Pendrith at $7,300 or Davis Thompson at $7,900. I would imagine they are the two most popular options in this range of 10 golfers. If you had to pick one for a GPP, which way would you go?
I'll go Davis Thompson. I've kind of made the argument that I think Davis Thompson has legitimate big boy tournament winning upside to where the game can, I mean, I guess Pendrith does too. I don't want to take that away from him, but I think Pendrith has more holes in his game also. Like Thompson has the ball striking ability to just turn it on any given week and find himself inside the top 10 and compete to actually win events like this. This is a former number 1 amateur in the world who has put the pieces together this season much more consistently than he did last year. And even last year, you can find specific events when he had first come out to where he went toe to toe with Rahm, almost takes down the tournament there. Like he can really play.
He can. And he looks, I walked obviously with him the whole day on Sunday at John Deere, and unflappable. On the second last hole, he drilled one into the trees, like 200-yard drive. Made his par or birdie. I didn't even know what he made because he didn't need to make more than that, but he could have completely unraveled and he was fine. Like hit a bad shot, got over it, was fine. So I'm a fan of him too. I think I would pick him in that department. And then in the sixes, Spence, Willie Z, just, hey, baby, we're back a little bit, and I kind of actually like this golf course even more so for him with the long iron numbers that we could expect. I don't know. I'm excited for him to be back a little bit. We'll see what he can do. Likely going to be a bit more popular again this week after a showing last week. So he might be a guy that you kind of get out on. But if the ownership remains stagnant on Will Zalatoris at $6,800, give it to me, baby. I'm in the mood for him a little bit. Austin Eckroat as well.
You want to hear the most ridiculous answer here with Will Zalatoris? And I mean, I guess technically the only bet which won me, I want to say $1 against you, that I've actually won on Will Zalatoris during this run is when I took Neiman over Zalatoris. But like, if you backtrack this to the RBC Heritage, 44th, 60th, 43rd, some of these are these elevated designated tournaments where there's not that many players. 41st miscut, 42nd miscut, 12th last week. I have not won a single bet fading this guy in that entire run. I have lost to him so many times in head-to-head matchups. I find a way, like there was, what tournament was it? Whatever event that he was like the first round leader at a couple months ago. I forget which one it was. I'll figure out what the answer is to it. But he's first round leader, right around first round leader. I take Adam Scott against him. He beats Adam Scott by like 17 strokes on day one, proceeds to come pretty much dead last, loses to Adam Scott the next 3 days. I had Ben On against him in a matchup a couple of months ago. Ben On has a 1-stroke lead going to the final hole. That one ended up being a push, but center of the fairway, puts it in the rough, can't chip it out, then ends up having to make a 7-foot putt, which was incredible to push that bet there. But
with the 7-footer.
Yeah, I mean, that was I talk about like not getting lucky recently. I know I got unlucky for Ben On to be in that position there from the fairway, but I have lost to this guy 100 times. I lost him again last week with Ben On. Like the form has consistently not been there, and I can't seem to beat him in any of these matchups. Of all the times I have faded him and all the times that I've wanted to fade him, This is not one of those opportunities. I actually agree with you, Byron. I don't know how popular he's going to be, and maybe that's a different discussion to be had. There's real upside for the price for a golfer who finally flashed form. He gained across the board. With the putter is one thing. Like, that's not necessarily something I expect, although on fast surfaces, he does tend to do this now and then again. So, Zalatoris, while yes, it's only a 50-man field, he was inside the top 30 for me for upside. Very near the bottom for safety, but I think if you're just like shooting for the moon on a player, if there's no ownership, there's a lot worse ways than you could do it with Zalatoris. And as you know, Byron, I have said every single week for 4 months, I am not touching him with the 10-foot pole here.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, I've been on him a few times here and there. If this course plays difficult, I've bet Will Zalatoris at 80-1 with 5 places each way. So, give me a 20-1 for a top 5 on him. That's basically why I went there, is to just get that top 5 equity. I think he can do it. Like, we're starting to see some stuff from him again. Maybe if he weighs this as like a mini major, he hasn't really done the best in them yet. As you have to start making the top 30 and things like that for Tour Championship, maybe he nuts up a little bit more and kind of shows us what he's got. So we'll see what he can do.
He also gained across the board at the Wyndham outside of the putting. And if you look at expected putting for this tournament, he goes from 46th in my model in strokes gained putting to inside of the top 32. So if you get an expected putting increase from Will Zalatoris with maybe some returns with the ball striking, like I'm not going to say last week was a bad read for me fading him in matchups because of what we've gotten from him necessarily. But I think this is a different spot for him. Like, I don't have a problem with the upside areas of the market.
Exactly. We are speaking about, this is Will Zalatoris, who's coming back from a back surgery. Okay, people. And now it's been a year or so, but at the same time, it takes a while to get it together. And I've always just trying to be ahead of Willie Z's market. And I think I'm going to keep trying to do that, especially at 80-1 this week. I think that was a very fair number for what we've seen from him. I would like for him to have potentially shown us a bit more high upside form before really betting him to win a tournament again. But you never know. Maybe he gets in there and just relishes that situation and goes for the dub. Some other guys that Spence, my model, really fancied. Eric Cole, $6,500. I've got him ranked 24th for upside. So your stuff is justified. Whether or not you hold on to those handles as tight as you can, watching him drive the golf ball, that remains to be seen. Max Griesemann at $6,300 actually graded out quite nicely for safety for me. He's just been a model of consistency, I guess, when it comes to top 20s. So he's got that going for himself there. And then Cam Davis, $6,200, my other option. We've seen him get hot in these playoffs. I hate Australians. I need one to love me back this week. Let's see. I guess I got Adam Scott as well. So we'll see what these guys can get up to. But tough scenes for Cam Davis the last 2 tournaments, but the ball striking has been really solid lately.
I gave a matchup today over at Rotoballer. I'm not going to have an extensive card. Too many unknowns with this tournament. I bet Morikawa at 17. I bet Eric Cole at 125. Those are going to be the 2 outright tickets that I have. I'll just move across the board and just not worry about anything there. I have one matchup right now. I don't plan on adding a ton more just because of the unknowns. There is a golfer down in this section that I actually really like, and the current form has been disastrous for him. And it was the one matchup that I actually won last week on a card that was not one of the most ideal outcomes for me. I bet Eric Van Rooyen in a matchup against Adam Hadwin. Ended up hitting that ticket. I'm going to play Adam Hadwin this week. I recommended him at Rotoballer at -110. As we seem to do, we moved it up to minus, I believe, 129 at BetOnline. I don't know if it'll come back. It was actually against Cam Davis. There was a lot in my model that really liked Adam Hadwin, like whether it's from a comp putting perspective, a weighted strokes gained total. We've seen him in this West Coast sort of swing before at different courses, but at some courses that are going to be similar to where he's found some high-end success. It's a little bit more of like that desert golf feel than what we're going to get here with a mountain feel. But I don't know. This to me is, the form has gone wrong, but the metrics love him. And it's not a golfer that my model ever seems to like. So when I had these massive upside totals for him, safety leaves a lot to be desired. And for a matchup, obviously, that's a different discussion to have. But when Cameron Davis had a lot of those same answers of like, outside of the top 45 for comp courses and all that. I thought I was getting a safer golfer at the end of the day, and one that had, I mean, at least comparable upside, because we know Cam Davis can pop, but also technically in my model, a better course fit. So I think Adwin's going to be sub 5% owned. That's going to probably be the golfer that I'm going to be exponentially overweight to this week.
It's so funny how we've got all these Canadians. It's sitting sub $7,500 that we got into a massive bidding war for last week, Spencer, on another show. And it was quite fun seeing how that all unfolded. So you never know what these guys are trying to do, especially heading into some President's Cup stuff. I do want to also mention to Darbo about Willie Z's back situation. If you take a look at his distance off the tee, and he mentioned in one of his presses, which I believe I brought up last week, is that he's managed to rekindle his love affair with 180 mile per hour ball speed, which he lost in the middle of the season. Since the PGA Championship, he's been above average in distance every single time he's teed it up on US soil. The Scottish and the Open Championship were the only two times he was below field average, and maybe that was temperature induced or what, I don't know. But I think you can say his back, pun intended there. So I think we're looking healthy. I think he's mentioned he feels 100% healthy. He feels comfortable over the golf ball. We can expect things to go well until they don't. And I think that's the mentality I'm going to be taking until we see something significant to tell us otherwise. So perfect. Darbo saying it isn't about speed, it's about longevity. Hey, bud, as long as it's for 4 days this week, that's all I care about. That's basically what I'm getting at you. It's like, if it goes to sour grapes this week, then he's off the card, going forward after that. So any hoozles. Spence, what else is going on? Anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
No, I am happy to note for anybody who was worried about me that I did get the AC fix. So we're able to sit here on this show and not be in 100-degree temperature. So it was nice to do that while that. I don't know what that was last week, but no, there's not much else like we've kind of talked about. Like, we will get a lot more indicators of where ownership is going to be trending over the next 24 to 48 hours. That will help to make a lot of these decisions. There are going to be certain players like a Hadwin that I just know I'm going to be higher than the market on, but then piecing it around there, we can figure that out as the next couple days come along.
Exactly. And like we said, 50 people in the field. It's going to be very flat with ownership. Find where you can get your value, find your leverage, and go from there. Awesome stuff, folks. Thank you for tuning into the Rollerballer PGA show. Catch Spencer at T of Sports on X. Catch me at The Model Maniac over there. We will be providing you with content all week. If you aren't already familiar with what we get up to, at rotoballer.com, use code SUMMER for 30% off. It's one of the best deals you can get out on the PGA content side of things. Between you, me, Joe Idoni, the rest of the gang over there, we have got everything you could wish for at rotoballer.com. So we really appreciate you guys tuning in. The chat guys were awesome to start the show. Kind of fell asleep on us halfway through there a little bit, but it's okay. You guys have been typically very solid for the most part. So Darbo, we appreciate you. Ed, we appreciate you. Everyone else that showed up early, we also appreciate you guys too. I'm just giving you a bit of trouble because you know what? You guys give me more than enough in the chat there. So on the way out, hit the like button, subscribe, do all that jazz. We love you guys. We'll see you guys next week for a fun show, either on Preferred Lines or the Rotoballer PGA show. We got a fun show ready for you guys. So stay tuned for the Tour Championships next week, and we'll see you then.